Chagorus, known in Imperial Gothic as Mundus Planus, is classified as a feral world of the Yasan sector in the Ultima Segmentum, and is the homeworld of Primarch Jaghatai Khan, as well as the homeworld of the White Scars Space Marine chapter. During the closing centuries of the Age of Strife, Chagorus' human population unfortunately regressed to a largely feudal, black powder level state of technology and civilization. At the time, the planet was dominated by a powerful empire and ruled by a governing individual known as the Palatine, who controlled the world from the city of Quanzhou. Now, prior to his arrival to the Great Crusade, Jagatai Khan united the nomadic tribes of Chagorus' western deserts into a singular, unstoppable horde, and he used them to overthrow the Palatine's empire. Eventually, when the Khan would depart the world alongside the Emperor of Mankind, he left the governance in the hands of Ogedi. However, Ogedi lacked the strength and authority to maintain unity amongst the tribes, and Chagorus would soon fracture once more into a state of constant intertribal warfare. This fragmentation may have been a deliberate setup by the Khan, as it would ensure the preservation of the planet's harsh warrior culture, and it did that to a letter. This made them ideal for producing future White Scars aspirants. Though there were later attempts to reunite the tribes, none would ever match the Khan's success. As records show, Mundus Planus was classified as a feudal world during the Great Crusade and later was redesignated as a feral world, making it somewhat unique for the homeworld of one of the first founding chapters of Space Marines, because it remains in this feral state while actively serving as a Space Marine chapter homeworld. At the time of the Great Crusade, the planet's population stood at approximately 1.8 billion individuals. However, throughout the 41st millennium, this total population has declined drastically to roughly around 10 million. Depending on the source, and governance currently rests with the Great Khan Jubal. This world also carries a tithe grade of Salutio Prima. Another important feature of Chagorus is the nomad horse tribes, which provide the White Scars with their neophytes. In particular, they have maintained the Great Plains in order to foster these tribes, due to the culture of speed, mobility, and relentless warfare that these environments perfectly foster, which mirror the chapter's preferred methods of war. The native language on the planet must also be noted to be quite distinct from Low Gothic, Low or High Gothic, known as Kichagarn, which is spoken both by the tribes of Chagorus and the White Scars. Ancient imperial records, including the Libra Historica Vangelia, state that Primarch Jagatai Khan was discovered upon a world in the Ultima Segmentum, designated by Imperial cartographers as Mundus Planus, known throughout its native population as Chagorus. At the time the Khan's arrival, Chagorus itself was a fertile, temperate world marked by lush plains and towering mountain ranges, along with vast azure seas. Technologically, Chagoran civilization had reached a level broadly comparable with Earth's late medieval era, with sporadic clusters of Renaissance era-like structures. Black powder weapons had only just recently been invented and were starting to become widespread in their use, meaning that warfare remained largely dominated by steel, discipline, and massed cavalry formations. A contemporary census imperialist record shows that political power rested in a rather dominant feudal empire, ruled by an autocrat known as a Palatine, whose aristocracy had subjugated much of the planet's smaller civilizations and tribes through the use of well-equipped, highly disciplined pre-industrial armies. Primarily, these were made up of armored cavalry, clad in full plate and dense infantry blocks, which had been used extensively to secure victory in every campaign the Palatine had waged. Beyond the empire's western front was a vast and widespread steppe known as the Empty Quarter. This desolate region was the home to the nomadic tribes of horsemen who roamed the grasslands for centuries, living in what was, in essence, portable tents and semi-nomadic structures, following a strict cycle of seasonal migrations between summer pastures and sheltered winter valleys, in particular within the Kumakrata Mountains. These tribes were consummate horsemen and expert archers, bound by oral tradition and deeply ingrained warrior ethos. These steppe tribes frequently warred amongst themselves for control of their ancestral lands, or as their own ballads claimed, for the sheer joy of battle. The empty quarter itself held little economic or military value for the Palatine Empire. Thus, it was never actively subject to formal conquest. However, the nobles of the eastern feudal states would often raid into the steppe on hunting expeditions, in particular to seize entire tribes for enslavement or capturing lone tribesmen to be hunted throughout the mountains for sport, as they played the most dangerous game. The sacred White Scars Chronicle, known as the Great Khan, devotes numerous passages to the atrocities committed by the Palatine's servants against the steppe peoples. Accounts of blood rituals, sacrificial practices, and systemic cruelty, to the point that it has even led many imperial historians and scholars to theorize that the Palatine's empire might have been dedicated unknowingly or otherwise to the worship of the dark gods, manifesting in one of their many recurring cultic expressions found across the galaxy. The legends surrounding Jagatai Khan are functionally inseparable from the very history of Chagorus, for it was upon this world that his fate was irrevocably shaped. The ancient accounts place the Primarch's arrival near the Quanon River, where his gestation capsule came to rest after being cast through the warp, and he would be discovered by Ogn Khan, the leader of a small steppe tribe known as the Talkars, who believed the radiant child was a gift from the gods and adopted him into his family, giving the Primarch the name Jagatai. From his earliest years, the people of the Empty Quarter remarked that the boy possessed fire in his eyes, an expression that was reserved for those destined to become great warriors. Even amongst the brutal realities of the steppe life, Jagatai was said to possess an unnatural clarity of vision, seeing beyond the endless cycles of the tribe's warfare and all that defined the Empty Quarter. This made him both respected and feared, even as a child, by rival tribes. A defining moment in Jagatai's young life came with the murder of Ogn Khan by the rival Kuryade tribe. In response, Jagatai gathered the warriors of the Talask and led a devastating reprisal, annihilating the Kuryade completely. Their yurts were burned and their people slaughtered. And some say he learned what was best in life: to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. As Jagatai rode upon the plains with the rival tribe's chieftain's decapitated head mounted on his tent, this act forged the dual nature which would define Chagorus' future: ruthless vengeance bound to an ironclad code of loyalty and honor. From that day, Jagatai swore to end the ceaseless brother wars of the steppe and unite all peoples of the Empty Quarter. Over the following years, Jagatai fought countless battles across the western plains, defeating rivals tribes and repeatedly repelling aristocratic hunting parties sent by the Palatine's empire to terrorize the nomads. As he did this, his followers grew in numbers until they became a true confederated government, known as the Mathuli, which in common Low Gothic means the irresistible force. Under the leadership of Jagatai, military service became mandatory, as the tribe's identities were deliberately broken up and mixed in together by having them served in mixed units, and warriors would now only be promoted by merit. Loyalty would shift away from clans and bloodlines, but rather towards the unity of the steppe peoples themselves. A turning point came when an avalanche separated Jagatai from his migrating tribe during winter, leading to him being captured by one of the Palatine's noble hunting bands, led by the ruler's own son. Only one mutilated rider ever returned east, bearing the severed head of the Palatine's heir, alongside a message declaring that the people of the steppe were no longer his prey. In a furious move, the Palatine assembled a massive pre-industrial army and marched west in order to exterminate all lives within the Empty Quarter. The confrontation that followed reshaped Chagorus forever. The heavily armored cavalry and tightly drilled infantry of the Empire would wind up proving incapable of bringing the lightly armored steppe warriors to heel in battle, as endless arrow storms and relentless maneuvers broke the Imperial host, slaughtering nearly the entire army and forcing the Palatine himself to flee back to the capital. In the aftermath, the elders of the Empty Quarter proclaimed Jaghatai Khan as the Khan of Khans, alongside being the rightful ruler of all the steppe peoples. From his position, he began the conquest of the rest of Chagorus, a world dominated by a singular solid continent. City after city was given the same choice: surrender or destruction. Many submitted, others were erased entirely. And when Jagatai's forces finally reached the Palatine's capital, the population turned on their ruler, delivering his severed head to the Khan in hopes of mercy. Within less than 20 standard years, the Khan had unified Chagorus from ocean to ocean, creating the largest empire on the planet in its entire history. Yet this dominion was never intended to be permanent. The steppe people had no desire to rule the settled lands, and Jagatai himself ruled not through complex institutions, but through simple laws enforced by the certainty of annihilation. For those who broke the peace, the endless wars that had scarred Chagorus for centuries had now come to an abrupt end. Unfortunately, what civilization might have emerged from this fragile, tenuous unity will never be known, because as soon as Jagatai ascended to the rank of Master of Chagorus, the Emperor of Mankind would arrive, and eventually, much as he is known to do, he would draw away his son for a greater destiny, leaving Chagorus forever shaped by the Khan's brief yet incandescent rule. To go into further detail, the unification of Chagorus under Jaghatai Khan and his rule lasted less than 6 solar months. Half a year, and the planet had been conquered from ocean to ocean. Then, shortly thereafter, the Emperor arrived in 865 M30 as part of the advancing Great Crusade. Ironically enough, he did not have the White Scars Legion with him. The Primarch who Chagorus had unknowingly nurtured would meet the Luna Wolves first. This would lead him to not only meeting the Emperor, but also Horus Lupercal. By this time, Chagorus had been fundamentally transformed. Once a fractured tribal empire based around the Empty Quarter, now had banded together and taken over the entirety of the world. The feudal empires of the East had been completely and utterly brought to heel under a single will. Jagatai's achievement in the end would rival that of any Primarch during their years of isolation, and the Emperor would openly acknowledge him as one of his true sons, and the rightful inheritor of a destiny prepared for him long ago. Yet the arrival of the Emperor also marked the end of Chagorus' time as an independent realm. The Kagan, who had forged unity through conquest and rule, now faced a power greater than he had ever considered. Though many Imperial scholars describe Jagatai's submission as one of awe and reverence, his own writing suggests a colder understanding. He recognized in the Imperium the same ultimatum that he had once imposed on the tribes and cities of Chagorus: unity through submission or annihilation through resistance. Jagatai negotiated terms for Chagorus' future, securing guarantees for treatment of its people and their place within the Imperium evermore. With this bargain struck, Chagorus passed peacefully into Imperial compliance. The Emperor's secular doctrine of the Imperial truth would then replace the fractured mythologies of the planet and end the long cycle of endemic warfare in a more pronounced way than Jagatai's own domination of the planet. Not through fear and power alone, as the Khan had done, but through inclusion within a greater human domain. With Chagorus secured, Jagatai relinquished direct rule of the planet, and governance of the world and its leadership would be given to that of the steppe people, specifically entrusted to one of his closest generals, Ogedei. While the Khan himself departed alongside the Emperor, many of Chagorus' warriors would also choose to follow him beyond the skies, becoming warriors not just of Chagorus, but of the 5th Legion, carrying the traditions of the steppe into the void. Chagorus itself would remain relatively primitive by Imperial standard, its cultural influences being largely unchanged enduring the more than 10,000 millennia that have passed, as the nomadic values of speed, merit, and personal honor shaped not only the world, but the Legion, which would become the White Scars, ensuring that the spirit of the steppes lived on long after Jaghatai had left his homeworld behind. While Chagorus wouldn't be a main battlefield during the Horus Heresy or throughout much of its history, you might have noticed that there was a discrepancy between its pre-Great Crusade population and that of its current. In part, that is because of some of the more notable incidents having occurred since the Horus Heresy. One of these incidents would occur in 890 M41, when Chagorus was briefly threatened and damaged by a Xenos incursion of unknown interest when the Necron Crane-class tomb ship translated into orbit just above the planet without issuing any communication or declaration of purpose, which is actually rather abnormal for most Necron dynasties. The vessel commenced a saturation bombardment against remote and uninhabited regions upon Chagorus' surface. The precise objective of this was unknown, as no evidence of attempted planetary invasions or large population groupings being destroyed were ever recorded. The response by the White Scars was swift and deadly. The White Scars battle barge, known as Jagatai's Pride, forced its way through the tomb ship's defensive systems and disrupted its ability to maneuver or retaliate. Simultaneously, the ancient defense lasers mounted on the Quanshum Fortress Monastery were brought to bear at full strength. Then, a singular catastrophic discharge led to the Necron vessel being completely annihilated in orbit. After this, no further Necron activity was recorded within the entirety of the Chagorus system. Then, in 0435 999.999.991 M41, an Imperial transmission had been sent, noting that Chagorus was suffering from a full-scale infestation by a subterranean Xenos species known as a Drow, operating beneath the planet's very surface. The Drow spread through tunnel networks deep below inhabited regions, evading early detection and complicating Imperial response efforts. Details regarding the origins of the infestation, its duration, and its ultimate resolution remain fragmented or sealed within restricted Administratum archives. What is known is that the Drow posed a severe threat to Chagorus' stability, forcing extensive cleansing operations beneath the planet's crust, and reinforcing long-held beliefs amongst Imperial authorities that the world of the White Scars was a recurrent focal point for Xenos and warp-born intrusions. These intrusions would be many, including a rather large conflict which started in 990-999 M41. When Chagorus became a battlefield upon which great powers contended with each other. The world and its surrounding systems became drawn into a conflict when the Red Corsairs pirate fleet, commanded by Huron Blackheart, launched a series of raids across the entirety of the Yasan sector. The scale of this threat was so large that the White Scars were forced to withdraw significant forces from the Third War for Armageddon and the Second Algerian Campaign. The situation deteriorated even further still following the fall of Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade, as the galaxy now fractured and the warp rift known as the Maelstrom surged across reality, cutting the Imperium in twine. From the Maelstrom's heart came what appeared to be an eclipse that swallowed the stars above Chagorus itself as the planet recoiled under the touch of the warp. Its grasslands ignited, the native beasts twisted into monstrous forms, and the once cruelescent open skies became a canvas of fire and madness. From the Maelstrom's heart, further still, came the Red Corsairs, in force and number greater than ever before. Across the plains of Chagorus, they slaughtered nomad tribes and raised obscene monuments of corpse and flesh alike, in dedication of the dark craving gods. Entire regions were laid to waste, as the invaders carved ritual scars all across the world. At the same time, in the wider Yasan sector, fires burned as the nearby worlds of Gratuli and Thaxis fell to chaos insurrections, their defenders annihilated to a man, and their surviving populations forced to flee in desperate waves towards Chagorus. Few of these refugees ever reached even relative safety, as warp storms shredded Imperial shipping lanes as they attempted to reach the Chagorus system, while trader vessels further still made things worse, as they slipped through the Imperium with unnatural ease. By the time servitor probes detected an enemy fleet transitioning into local space, it was already clear that the fate of Chagorus would be decided on the ground rather than in any form of void combat. From the ramparts of Quanzhou, the ancient seat of planetary power, now the White Scars Fortress Monastery, Jaghatai Khan declared that the battle would be fought by blade to blade upon the soil of the great Khan's homeworld. Vastly outnumbered, and with much of the chapter scattered across the stars, the White Scars relied upon their intimate knowledge of Chagorus' features. Ferocious storms, treacherous salt marshes, and hidden mountain passes became weapons, as the Chaos warbands would be constantly ambushed amidst raging tempests, lured into killing fields, or torn apart by native predators driven into their ranks by the nomads who had once peacefully lived in these plains. Despite these advantages, Chagorus burned, nomad camps were annihilated, and fortifications were shattered. The tribes of the Empty Quarter suffered appalling losses. Wherever Huron Blackheart personally led his forces, all resistance collapsed. Even the return of Jaghatai Khan, chapter master of the White Scars, with survivors from Armageddon, could do little more than slow and stem the tide. Matters worsened further still when the Cicatrix Maledictum tore reality asunder, and the Maelstrom expanded significantly, consuming the fringes of the Yasan sector in its totality, as demonic legions spilled onto Chagorus to fight alongside the Red Corsairs. Hundreds of thousands of the planet's inhabitants would be exterminated in mere days. Fearing the extinction of the warrior tribes from which the White Scars drew their strength, Jaghatai Khan desperately lured Chaos and its main forces towards Quanzhou, sacrificing the territory in order to preserve what remained of Chagorus' people. The final struggle itself was centered upon the Krata Mountain, where the fortress monastery of the White Scars stood proper, now besieged by both fire and ruination. Yet salvation would arrive in the brink of oblivion when Corsaro Khan, master of the hunt, arrived with the entirety of the Third Brotherhood. Having braved the madness of the Noctis Aeterna in order to reach their homeworld, they rallied scattered White Scars and formed vast tribal militias who were each hungry for their own pound of flesh to be drawn from the Red Corsairs. Using them, Corsaro launched a devastating counterattack, all the while being shrouded by the titanic Chagoran storms summoned by the chapter's Stormseers. Caught between converging forces, the Red Corsairs were driven back after 3 brutal days of fighting. Though Chaos reinforcements did in fact surge across the planet, the lifting of the Noctis Aeterna weakened the warp's hold on the world, causing many of the demonic allies which had recently arrived to dissipate. Calculating the cost, Huron Blackheart intelligently decided to withdraw his forces, leaving behind scattered renegade warbands alongside traitor cults on a world now scarred almost beyond recognition. The aftermath of this was that Chagorus now stood, bloodied, yet unlike Cadia, it was unbroken. The White Scars would now begin the long process of reclaiming this devastated homeworld, even as the galaxy burned around them. Relief would finally come in great number when the battle group Delphi II of the Indominus Crusade, whose fleets pierced the warp storms fully, delivered Primarch Space Marines in order to reinforce the chapter, alongside with new vessels and war gear. From the ashes of slaughtered camps and ruined plains, recruitment resumed amongst the Chagoran surviving tribesmen. Once again, the world of the Great Khan endured, despite its population being devastated to an extreme. At current date, comparing Chagorus to many Imperial worlds leaves you with the sight of a rather underdeveloped planet who is currently recovering from constant devastation. And while its cities, spaceports, and Imperial installations do exist in rather well-defended states, much of the planet retains its semi-feudal characteristics, with the majority of its population living well beyond urban settlements. The greatest region of Chagorus still remains the vast Empty Quarter. Across these grasslands still roam the nomadic horse tribes, as their migrations are currently still dictated by Chagorus' extreme seasonal cycles. This is promoted by the White Scars in order to be able to breed and form the genetic bedrock of their chapter, causing the tribes to live largely apart from technology of the wider Imperium, using primarily hunting bows, trained raptors known as Bekruts, and fighting amongst each other with blades and hunting weapons, having left the planet relatively unchanged across millennia. Much of their weaponry, technology, and tools are made from the hardy Undu and Yat beasts, which they raise, whose hides and bones, along with sinew, are worked with remarkable skill. Though often dismissed as primitive by the wider Imperium, the tribes of Chagorus possess a refined and ancient culture, as they produce weapons of extraordinary beauty and intricate works of art. Amongst their numbers are masters of calligraphy, poetry, oral history, and artists, all who preserve traditions that predate the Imperium's arrival by untold centuries. And this, some Imperial scholars believe, is part of the Khan's long deliberate plan to have Chagorus largely fall back into its disunity, believing that the perpetual struggle would preserve its strength, ferocity, and identity, alongside with the independence of its people, also ingraining the belief that the planet's very state was essential for the recruitment of future warriors into the Legion, which has led to the White Scars largely fighting wars just to maintain the planet as it was.